Welcome to another Buyer's Guide episode. This time it's back to school, so, see, you can tell because I'm wearing this backpack, which has a Windows Vista logo on it. Anyway, it's a notebook buyer's guide, and don't worry, none of the notebooks in front of me are running Windows Vista. They are all running the very latest Windows 8. However, they are optimized for very different use case scenarios, and I think you'll find that the operating system is pretty much where the similarities end. No, but seriously, I was being facetious before, guys. These do have more in common with each other than the fact that they all run Windows 8, for example. They all have screens, batteries, and keyboards. However, no, it's actually starting to get gray already. I'm going to go in order of what I consider to be the most portable and versatile, all the way up to what I consider to be the least portable and the least versatile, bearing in mind, of course, they are all still notebooks. So kicking things off, we've got the TX300 from ASUS. This falls into the convertible class of products because while it is a notebook, just like that, you can detach the top of it and it becomes a nice, large IPS screen, so looks great, tablet computer. So, okay, if you don't necessarily need that, but you still want something thin and light, then you go into the ATIV 9 from Samsung. This is an Ultrabook class product, so thin and light and very, very portable, but without that convertible feature as a selling point. Then we go into the Fujitsu Lifebook, which is what I'd consider to be more like your daily driver. It's still an Ultrabook, but not quite as thin and light as the ATIV 9. Then we get into ones that this is where I get interested, guys. Gaming class notebooks. So this one right here, the G46V from ASUS, is what I'd consider to be more like a super portable gaming notebook. Because it's using a 14-inch class screen, even though it's a little bit thicker than your typical 14-inch notebook, it is still quite portable and easy to fit into even a smaller style backpack while still packing a pretty considerable gaming punch. If that's not enough for you, though, you can step up to the GS70 from MSI. This is more of the traditional gaming notebook form factor, so it's got a massive 17-inch class screen, very powerful graphics, but of course it is large and heavy and something that I'd consider to be more like a desktop replacement or even mobile workstation class of product. Of course, contrasting sharply with something like this. Now, when it comes to the TX300, I already gave away the punchline somewhat with the whole convertible into a tablet thing, but let's take a closer look at the device overall. Why would you buy this versus just going with something that's a dedicated tablet in the first place if you want that tablet functionality? Well, for one thing, it uses notebook class components, so it has a Core i7 processor and a 128 gig SSD, something you won't find in most, like Atom-based or ARM-based processor or iPads or anything like that. Next up is the fact that it has the versatility and flexibility that you're just not going to find in another tablet device. Once you clip it into the keyboard dock, which can't just simply be replaced by a Bluetooth keyboard on a tablet, because you get not only a keyboard and a touchpad, but also a ton of additional I/O. So on the side, you get an SD card reader as well as your charging port, which is magnetic, and I personally think that's awesome. It's a gorgeous brushed aluminum layout overall, which I think looks beautiful. On the right-hand edge, you get, yes, Ethernet. Love to see a hardwired Ethernet port still in this day and age because it's still the most reliable way to connect, as well as 2 super speed USB 3 ports and mini DisplayPort out. In addition to I/O, you get a 500 gig hard drive inside, so you're not forced to carry around an external hard drive if you want to add to the 128 gigs of solid-state storage that's in the top component. And finally, to provide reasonable battery life for the device, you get an extended battery that is housed inside the bottom unit as well, and all of this folds up nice and tight, just like a normal laptop would. So let's say you want ultimate portability, but you don't necessarily need bells and whistles like a touch screen, a detachable screen, optical drive, things like, who uses an optical drive anymore anyway? Then you might want to have a look at something like the ATIV 9 from Samsung. This particular model has a quad-core processor, a 128 gig SSD, and other than that, a pretty standard layout, but The advantage of it is that, check this out, you're able to save about 5 millimeters of overall thickness and a significant amount of weight compared to something like a TX300 by eschewing some of those additional things that some people might find unnecessary. Speaking of unnecessary, you will need to plug things into this notebook because it doesn't have a touchscreen. So on the left side, you're going to find power input, USB 3 super speed, micro HDMI, as well as, yes, hardwired LAN. You will need an adapter for it, but at least you have the choice. And I'm glad that they give that to you, as well as a little trap door for an SD card reader. I missed that the first time around, so we are reshooting this right now. It's very well hidden, which I guess is cool if you don't want to stare at your SD card slot. On the right-hand side, we've got VGA output. This is great because Samsung usually includes the adapter with their notebooks, and if you're presenting in an unfamiliar boardroom, you might be stuck using VGA, as well as a headphone-microphone combo jack, a USB 2 port, a security lock, and that is pretty much it, my friends. It also has Samsung's SideSync technology, which allows you to control Galaxy devices. So in addition to everything you get here, you get better integration by going with more devices from the same vendor. The Lifebook UH572 from Fujitsu represents what I'd consider to be a good compromise. It doesn't have all the highest end components, but it does come in at a very attractive price point. So it's got a Core i5 as opposed to a Core i7. It has an SSD hybrid solution using a 500 gig hard drive and 32 gigs of SSD cache instead of a dedicated SSD, but like I said, comes in at a very attractive price point and still conforms to Intel's Ultrabook specification. So what that means is, in addition to being light enough to be an Ultrabook and thin enough to be an Ultrabook, check this out. When you resume from sleep, it still has that high-performance SSD-like turn-on time. So check this out, guys. I'm going to go ahead and, oh, okay, I didn't need to press the button that time, but whatever, you got the point. It still turns on quickly, even though it doesn't have a dedicated SSD. Now, when it comes to I/O, it's pretty standard fare. So on the right-hand side, we get an SD card reader, a USB 2 port, as well as power input. Then, on the left-hand side, we find a Kensington lock, HDMI out, full size, which is nice to see, 2 USB 3 ports, as well as a headphone-microphone combo jack. The back of the notebook is very cleanly styled, and it's really nice to see, even on a laptop in this price range, a metal back on it. So it's not a full plastic construction like you would normally encounter. Now, we've been doing small size comparisons throughout, but this is where size starts to really change. So when it comes to the key differences, these are both gaming grade notebooks, but how are they different? Well, for one thing, they cost significantly differently. So what do you get for the difference in price stepping up from a G46V type product, you know, a small compact gaming notebook, to something like a full-fledged gaming notebook? For one thing, you're going to get a quad-core processor versus a dual-core. You're going to get a 1080p screen versus a 1600 by 900 screen, 16 gigs of RAM versus 8 gigs of RAM, RAID 0 SSDs, as opposed to a hybrid hard drive SSD sort of combo solution, although we did show that that does perform quite well and gives you quite a bit of storage. You get a GTX 765M versus a GTX 660M, which is actually a bigger difference than it sounds like. That's a much more powerful GPU. And, of course, you get the much larger screen. But let's talk about what differentiates these from each other as well. ASUS goes with a very sort of different industrial design for their Republic of Gamers grade notebooks. They've got a very matte finish on the top, and it's all about cooling. Massive vents at the back of this notebook make sure that you're not going to have any difficulty with respect to your components overheating, even during a long gaming session. The keyboard itself is a pretty straightforward affair with a chiclet style layout and no number pad, because this is still quite a small compact notebook in spite of the power inside. And this is something that you should note, it has wireless AC. So in addition to, on the left-hand side, having power in, gigabit Ethernet, 2 USB 3.0 ports, DisplayPort, as well as a microphone and a headphone jack, you get wireless AC, meaning you'll be able to have a better gaming experience even if you do have to run wirelessly, even though it's not something that I would particularly recommend for gaming purposes. On the right-hand edge, you've got VGA HDMI, USB 3.0, as well as an SD card reader. And this model is available with Thunderbolt as well, which is a bit of a unique adder. On the MSI notebook, we see a very different approach to the industrial design. It's more of something I'd look at and I'd go, yeah, it's kind of like a professional workstation-y looking thing. MSI has more gaming-looking gaming notebooks as well, but this one is very, very slick and beautiful looking. So the top actually has a brushed aluminum finish, and then the inside has, as you may or may not have expected, a metal finish as well. So it's got very solid overall construction, and this is where we start to see some of the gamer flash. It has a keyboard by SteelSeries that allows a lot of customization in terms of the colors of the backlights, and a large speaker panel that should be able to give you pretty darn good sound. When it comes to I/O, it's actually quite slim for a gaming notebook. You've got USB 3, SD, as well as power in and a security lock with ventilation on the side. This is one of the ways that they've achieved this slim form factor while not really compromising on the number of ports you can plug in. And speaking of not compromising on ports, check that out. 5.1 audio, just in case you wanted to hook it up to a more advanced audio system. You'll have to reconfigure that in the drivers, however. 2 USB 3.0 ports, 2 mini display ports out, which is kind of cool because in addition to HDMI, with a Kepler-based GPU inside, that gives you some pretty flexible options in terms of external displays. And last but not least, gigabit Ethernet, because I do want to see that on any gaming grade notebook. It should be noted that gaming notebooks don't typically have the same kind of battery life as something like an Ultrabook because of their more powerful components. However, NVIDIA Optimus technology does mitigate that somewhat because when you're not using that dedicated graphics card, it's able to turn it off to save power and use the onboard graphics instead. So all of this leaves us with the final question: what is the right choice for you? Do you want the ultimate in mobility without necessarily needing a tablet-like form factor? Do you want to be able to convert from notebook to tablet and vice versa? Or do you just want raw horsepower without being tethered to a desk like you would with a desktop, or something in between? I think for you guys, ultimately you're going to have to make your own choice, but for me, the answer is very clear. I would carry all of them if there were any conceivable way to possibly do it. Thank you for checking out this notebook buyer's guide on NCIX Tech Tips, and stay tuned next week because we're going to be going through what's available in the tablet space, and I suspect we might even see, with this whole convergence concept that's going on here, some familiar faces reappearing.